I'm Senator Dave Marsden from Fairfax County, and I chair this wonderful subcommittee. And we're all set to go today. We have two agenda items. First, we're going to start with an overview of the governor's proposed budget for commerce, trade, agriculture, and forestry, and natural and historic resources. And that's going to be put on by the Senate Finance Committee. And why don't you introduce yourself and a little bit about yourself so that people know that you've joined the committee staff, and because people will be knocking on your door.
Thank you, Senator Marsden. My name is Kendra Brown Shiflett, and I am new to the Senate Finance Committee staff, so please have patience with me. I'm stepping into some very big shoes. Jason Powell, who you all know very well, will be leaving us. Today is his last day. He was here. Oh, there he is. And so I will do my best to follow in his footsteps, but it'll take me a while to get up to his speed. My background is I spent the past 14 years with the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and prior to that I was with the Department of Planning and Budget for 10 years. And in that role I worked with agencies in the ag and forestry, natural resources, and economic development realms. So I've been around this area for a while, but I'm certainly not as familiar as a lot of folks in this room. And I look forward to working with you all.
Well, you are most welcome, and please proceed with your presentation.
All right, wonderful. So we're going to start off this morning with doing an overview of the governor's proposed amendments in commerce and trade. And you will find this in your book. I'm going to keep this overview this morning pretty high level because we'll also be going over this at the full committee meeting later on this morning. So in the governor's introduced budget, there's amendments that result in an increase of $597 million in general fund over the biennium in commerce and trade. And that includes $500 million in general fund for increased support for business readiness sites program, $50 million of that from designated FY 2022 balances, $35.5 million for the major headquartered workforce grant program, $35 million for Go Virginia initiatives, $10 million to support local building inspection programs, $10 million to capitalize the Virginia Power Initiative Innovation Fund, and $11 million for flood relief in Buchanan and Tazewell counties. And that's taken from unobligated regional greenhouse gas initiative balances. I've already messed up the presentation. That took me about a second. Thank you.
The chair's probably in here.
I bet you're right. Just to give a little bit more information on the Virginia Business Ready Sites program, that's a $500 million over the biennium, includes $250 million. It's contingent upon the actual general fund revenue collections exceeding the forecast at the end of this fiscal year. It also includes proposed language that directs the governor, the Secretary of Commerce and Trade, Finance, and the CEO of the Economic Development Partnership to appoint $450 million between the two programs. And of note in the site readiness program is that it will include authorizing VEDP in collaboration with the Department of General Services to buy or option up to 3 sites in Virginia. So that's a little bit different approach than what we have historically taken. Moving on to the overview of labor, the Secretary of Labor. There's funding for the Virginia Employment Commission to additional discretionary deposit of $100 million for the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. This, in addition to the $1.3 billion in federal pandemic relief, brings the funding added since FY 2021 to $18.7 million. And the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund is currently at 55% solvency with a balance of $1.46 billion. There's also included in Part 3 of the budget an authorization of a $30 million line of credit for the VEC for operational costs for the administration of the unemployment compensation program in periods of significant increases in unemployment. Moving on to agriculture and forestry. In the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, there is an increase of $2 million and 15 positions in FY24 to establish a new program for the registration and inspection of facilities selling certain hemp products, and that's related to legislation before the General Assembly this year. There's also funding included for agricultural technology. This is $1.25 million for agriculture, and this is part of a larger package of funding that you'll see throughout a couple different agencies. The $1.2 million is going to go to the Agriculture and Forestry Industries Development Fund for agriculture technology grants or loans. There's also going to be a new competitive grant fund established for agricultural technology research projects, and that's primarily dealing with controlled environment agriculture. And that's all part of this broader investment fund of $5 million across the biennium in multiple agencies. In the Department of Forestry, there's a proposed capital outlay authorization of $640,000 for acquisition of the Tharp tract to expand the existing Charlotte State Forest. And for the Racing Commission, the Breeders' Fund has an additional appropriation of $1.5 million, and that's to account for the revenue that's being received as a result of provisions in Chapter 2 that directed 0.025% of the money wagered on historical horse racing to be distributed to the Virginia Breeders' Fund. Moving on to natural resources. The introduced budget proposed net increases totaling $687 million, and it included in the Secretary of Natural Resources some fund strategies to implement flood resistance. This is $500 million in each year to develop these strategies and improve interagency cooperation for flood resilience across the Commonwealth. And this is a net zero transfer of an existing appropriation in the Secretary of Public Safety. In the Department of Conservation and Recreation, there's a deposit to the Water Quality Improvement Fund. $137 million is deposited. Of these, $87 million represents the allocation, the statutorily dedicated prior year excess revenue. And then there's a $50 million, a general fund supplemental appropriation to support the implementation of agricultural best management practices in accordance with the plan developed by the Secretary of Natural Resources. And we'll be hearing from the Department of Conservation and Recreation folks a little bit later, so I won't spend much time on their strategies. Moving on to the Department of Environmental Quality, there's a total of $237 million for deposits to the Enhanced Nutrient Removal Certainty Program, and that provides reimbursement of expenses for nutrient reduction upgrades at wastewater treatment plants. There's also funding for the Combined Richmond Soil Sewer Overflow Project, and that's $100 million in FY23, so in the first year. And then there's some additional funding provided for the Poor Creek Pump Station and some other smaller appropriations. In the Department of Wildlife Resources, there's the general fund transfer to the Game Protection Fund is increased by $1.2 million in FY24. There's expanded authorization for dam safety funding that's going to allow it's an expansion, modify the the existing capital outlay authorization of $9 million. And that's going to include dams of both high and significant hazards. The Department of The Department of in the Marine Resources Commission, there's some funding to address salary compression in law enforcement, and also some funding to update the benchmark stock assessment for the Chesapeake Bay blue crab. Are there any questions? I covered that pretty quickly.
Any questions from members of the subcommittee? Senator Barker.
How much, if we follow through just with the recommendations from the governor on those items, what would we end up with at the end of buy-in in terms of funds in the water quality improvement fund? No.
I'm going to look to Jason because he seems to.
About 400, I think 400 million in WQIF plus 15, yeah, for additional general fund for the Natural Resources Committee fund. I can dig into that.
Great, thank you.
We'll
Thank you,
verify
Matt.
and get back to you. Yes, sir.
All right.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Hanger.
just a question, I guess to be answered later, with the 100 million that's going to stormwater overflows, the overflows, combined sewer overflow in Richmond.
Yes, sir.
It would be helpful for us if we're going to could get a report on Richmond's effort and how much has been put into that project so far and total costs
Certainly.
projected.
I'll get that for you.
Okay. One issue I wanted to bring up, I think was during the last budget, we put 150 million into business-ready sites, and now we've increased that rather dramatically. And I think a lot of the money was going to be going into the planning for sites. And I would assume in this 500 million that we're now looking more at actually doing the infrastructure work to prepare these sites. Is that the understanding that that you have in terms of what the administration has in mind?
Senator, I believe that we will have the Economic Development Partnership presenting to us next week, and we will ask them that question if you'd like
Okay.
to. But I will certainly do some more research on it in the
Okay,
meantime.
because
The
that
answer is yes.
the answer is yes. I just hope they can match that up, as to where the the workforce is in place to not only do the work but to whatever we attract to the Commonwealth, that we're able to have the workforce to staff it and stock it with job-hungry Virginians. So, at any rate, thank you. All right. Any other questions? All right. Let's move on to the second half of our presentations today. And it's an overview of State Parks budget and operations. We're going to start off with Matthew Wells, Director. And please have a seat and let me give you a microphone here.
I got one for me right here.
Oh, you got one? Good.
Senator Ruff gets to stare at me. Sorry.
God.
It's rough in the morning, I know. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Matt Wells. I'm the Director of the Department of Conservation and Recreation. Just want to say at the outset, it's a tremendous honor to have been asked to lead this agency. We've got a great team. I've darkened many of your doorsteps for a number of years, advocating for funding support for natural resources agencies, including DCR, kind of in my spare time. So I'm in the very fortunate position of being able to turn my passion into my day job. So it's pretty exciting. I want to introduce the team really quick because we've got some new faces here. I've got my Chief Deputy Director, Andrew Smith, who came over to us from Farm Bureau, Deputy Director for Operations, Frank Stovall, who's over our Parks, Heritage, Land Conservation, and Planning and Recreation Resources, Laura Ellis, our Deputy Director for Admin and Finance, and Daryl Glover, who's our Deputy Director for Soil and Water, Dam Safety, Floodplain Management. Did I miss anything? There we go. All right, all things water. All right, there we go. For the people that missed that at home, I said very beautiful remarks. All right, so I'm going to, just to kind of frame this, I know it says State Park update on the agenda, but I do want to talk a little bit about some of our water programs as well. So we'll start with that. And just to dig in a little bit on staff's report on the budget, the governor's introduced budget does continue to build on the historic funding for ag BMPs that was included in the budget that you all adopted last year. Senator Marsden, to your question, the total WQIF deposit for 23 was $313 million. Out of that, $235 million went to ag BMP cost share grants, $21 million to districts for TA, and then 3.6 for admin and ops. To break that out by year, for fiscal 23, the Soil and Water Conservation Board put about $123 million into the cost share program, which left about a similar amount available for this year. So each year we work with a group of stakeholders to evaluate the needs assessment, and after doing that math, a combination of inflation and adjustments to the timeline that we made to try to prioritize annual practices and stream fencing to align with some Virginia statutory requirements, that resulted in a shortfall of about $74 million in the needs assessment. So we what you see here in front of you is a proposal for $87 million into WQIF, which covers the needs assessment, and then the required deposit to the WQIF reserve, and I've got a breakdown of that on the next slide. So in addition to the $87 million, the governor has proposed putting $50 million into the Natural Resources Commitment Fund from general fund dollars, so this is a plus up on the money that's coming from WQIF. I think this will probably be the first time in history that we've ever exceeded the needs assessment, but I think we all understand that the need is tremendously significant, and our thought is that while we have the funding available, we should devote the funding to these programs. We've gotten some questions about the language that directs the Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources to put together a plan for how to allocate this. I think our thought there is that we would get the money out there, get the money in the system, bring together the stakeholders and determine what's the best way to allocate that. But once, and you all are aware of this, once it goes into the NRCF, it is limited to being spent on BMPs. But we did think that there was some room for conversation about how that breaks out, but certainly wanted to recognize the need, and that's why the funding is in there. So if you add up this year and last year, you are looking at about $400 million into cost share grants. That is a tremendous amount of money, but again,
That's 400 million, not 400.
that's a different thing. So 400 million. Just to answer your question, it's about 400 million that went into the WQIF. Some of that was allocated to various carve-out programs. But when you take what is going to the BMP program, that's about 400 million as well. So tremendous amount of funding, hopefully available for that to support the work of our districts and our producers. The budget also does contain about $400,000 in general fund to support 4 existing positions within the Soil and Water Division. These are currently supported by federal grant dollars. The requirements of the grant program are shifting, and we're not going to be able to use those funds anymore. So absent this general fund appropriation, we would not be able to maintain these positions, which obviously we need, particularly with the increased activity around those programs. And here you can just see a breakdown of the positions that it would go to. All right. Just a little bit more detail on the proposed WQIF deposit for this year. As I mentioned, $13.3 million for the reserve, and then $65 million for BMPs, $45.7 in the Bay watershed, $19.5 in the Southern Rivers, and then $8.5 for district support. We did get a question about the status of the WQIF reserve. As of the beginning of January, there was about $52.4 million in that fund.
What is typically the technical assistance funding for the districts? What does that usually entail?
So that's the fund that they use to support getting farmers into the program. Daryl, any additional context on Yeah, staffing. And I think that's been a challenge. Having a stable level of funding so that the districts could staff up appropriately. It does take some time, once they hire these staff, to get the relationships in the field that they need to get the farmers into the program. So there's a little bit of a trailing indicator on that. But certainly as the scope of the program and the funding in the program has increased, it's important, I think, to increase the level of support for our districts.
How is that trending in terms of farmer engagement with the?
I think well. If you look at the numbers that we got from December within the Bay watershed, about I think 54% of the funds from that had been allocated for fiscal 23 were applied for. Outside the Bay watershed, I think it's 90% ish. So that's really good. I think, generally speaking, we can do a better job of getting more farmers in the program. If you look at just percentage-wise, the number of producers that are in the cost share program versus how many producers are out there, there's a lot of ground that we could still cover. And I think one of the things that we would look to do as an agency is to look for ways that we could support marketing and other efforts to get more producers into the system. There's a little bit of money, I think it was about $10,000 that was allocated to the department to support that. But certainly we're looking for ways that we could expand those efforts in partnership with our
Generally,
stakeholders.
what is, other than, is it just all finance as to why farmers don't get involved in the program, or what is the reluctance that you run into?
I would say it's a variety of issues, and not wanting to speak for all of the producers. But I think finance could play into it. It could be hesitancy within the program. It could be not understanding the program. But we think that there's a lot of communication that remains to be done on that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Hanger.
I think one of them, the reason is lack of timely technical assistance, I guess. And I was wondering, do y'all have any form of internship programs, within the soil and water conservation specifically is where I'm talking about, where Darrell would have people being trained?
You talking about to be district staff or to be?
Essentially. I was sitting here daydreaming, and an idea popped into my head as far as recruiting interns for summer interns from the Virginia Tech and Virginia State.
I don't know if we have any interns right now.
We hire one intern for nutrient management, but that's all we have funding for.
But I think
I might explore that.
Yeah, if we're certainly open to ideas about how we can do a better job of getting out there. I'm looking for my specific burn report, and I don't have it, but I'm sure that some folks in the audience that know about this would have corrected me if I had gotten those numbers wrong. All right, moving on. So talk a little bit about dam safety, floodplain management, and resilience. The governor's introduced budget also contains significant funding for these items. That includes $200 million to fully operationalize the Resilient Virginia Revolving Fund. You all will recall that the Revolving Fund was established last year with a $25 million initial capitalization that came out of the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. The Revolving Fund is designed to help support resilience and flood mitigation projects in communities around the Commonwealth. I hate to say that $25 million isn't a lot of money, but it is hard to create a revolving fund with $25 million. And so the goal here would be to sufficiently fund this for it to be a true revolving fund. One thing I want to emphasize here is that the revolving fund and the proposed $200 million is meant to complement the Community Flood Preparedness Fund and not replace it. And talk a bit about that in the next couple of slides. But these are two distinct programs. They work towards the same general end, but they have different flavors, and we think that having some more tools in the toolbox would be helpful. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and why we have chosen to plus up the revolving fund in a second. The budget also does provide the $1 million that staff mentioned for the Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources to support resilience coordination efforts across Virginia. As an example of this, the Secretary's direction, DCR is convening a resilience coordination working group at the end of the month. This is designed to help determine ways that we can coordinate our programs better, resilience programs better across state agencies, how we can coordinate our funding efforts better, how we can work with state or local and federal partners, particularly federal partners, to draw down funds, and may make recommendations on potential changes in governance, and I know there's some conversation about that. Last year, we are supporting that working group right now with internal resources as well as the generosity from Old Dominion University's Institute for Coastal Adaptation and Resilience. They got some money last year in the budget, and they have been kind enough to help fund the facilitation of this group out of that pot. But this money would be used to support those kind of efforts, so we're not leaning on others. The staff mentioned this isn't a DCR line item, but since it touches on flooding, did want to mention the $11.4 million for recovery efforts in Buchanan and Tazewell that's being administered through the Department of Housing and Community Development.
Senator Hanger.
On that, that's almost identical to the amount we put in there this past year with Hurley. I was wondering if there's a worksheet on that, or that was just meant to kind of like the same thing again.
I don't know. I can ask DHCD to follow up with you on that. I just wanted to flag it here since it seems relevant.
Yeah. Matt, is the recovery money in Buchanan and Tazewell, that's an ongoing problem, especially in Buchanan. I know they've shifted the town from one side of the river to the other. Are we having problems on the higher side, or is it mostly in the lower pre-existing side that
I think
suffered?
this was these were some flash flooding incidents. Again, it'd probably be better to have DHCD come give the details on it. But we can come back and get you the details specific to that.
It wasn't necessarily in the
I think the riverbed the river just swelled over and the water came down the mountain. We did. DCR does have a little bit of a role to play in disaster recovery. We primarily deal with mitigation efforts, but we did send staff out to Buchanan to do a damage assessment, which is part of the application process for FEMA funds. And we have been working with a number of localities in Southwest Virginia to try to get ahead of the problem through the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. So.
Senator Marsden, we will also have the Department of Housing and Community Development will be here next week, and so we'll be sure that they touch on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Talking about dams quickly, DCR regulates about 2,600 dams across the Commonwealth with 5 dam safety engineers, which is not a great ratio. Most of these dams are privately owned. Many of them are reaching the end of their intended lifespan. Many of them don't have a hazard classification. So we've been taking steps to address our dam inventory, both in terms of getting hazard classifications for these structures. There was $20 million in the budget that you all passed last year for dam safety grants and additional funding for soil and water district dams. So we are making a hard push to address the problem, but the bottom line is that we need more boots on the ground to help this out. So these positions, which will be funded by federal infrastructure dollars, so there's not state money, will go a long way. One thing, not necessarily a budgetary item, but I did want to flag because it touches on this, that we do have agency legislation to establish a state standard for development activity in a floodplain by state agencies or on state lands. We've already been working on this under Executive Order 45. This would codify essentially what we're already doing. Then we've got a number of additional resilience-related activities, including the Coastal Resilience Technical Advisory Committee, the Resilience Coordination Working Group that I mentioned, a community outreach and engagement plan that is designed to support the update of the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan, Community Flood Preparedness Fund Round 4, and Resilient Virginia Revolving Fund Round 1. I flagged these for you all because we are able to fund these activities currently through the CFPF and revolving fund dollars, but we don't have positions to add right now, so we're kind of getting creative right now with how we're supporting these efforts. Talking a little bit more about the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, we just wrapped the 3rd round of grants from the CFPF. We awarded just over $65 million to projects across Virginia. We got about $92 million in applications for that round. Across 3 rounds, we've fielded about 130 applications and awarded nearly $100 million in grants. I want to flag that over 2/3 of those grants have gone to low-income areas, which is well in excess of the 25% that's required in statute. Here you can see an income and expense breakdown from the fund. So total revenues from auctions to date is a little over $235 million. Total expenses are $156 million. This includes allocations from the 3 grant rounds, along with the initial capitalization of the revolving fund, the contract for phase 1 of the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, which we are that contract is wrapping up now, and then a kind of reserve that we are holding back for for the next round of the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, the statewide plan, and related efforts. So when you back all of that out again, and that's $30 million to take us through fiscal 26. So when you back all of that out, that leaves a net available balance of about $78 million. This will be supplemented with at least a few more auction rounds before the Commonwealth withdraws from RGGI. So we are comfortable that the existing balance plus those auction revenues will be more than sufficient to support future rounds through the end of fiscal 25 as we're moving to an annual cycle on that. So this would take us through into the next budget cycle and into the conversation about how this program is funded in a post-RGGI environment. This kind of gets to the reason why we have chosen to plus up the revolving fund this year, and it's simply because the revolving fund doesn't have a lot of money in it right now, whereas the flood fund has a significant amount of funding, will continue to get some funding, and we're comfortable that it will be able to continue to operate.
Okay, Matt, what are typical grant requests that are coming in? What kind of work? Is it widely varied? Is it come into some categories? What?
So, and we actually get into some categories in the next round, but generally speaking, it varies tremendously. We get grant applications as small as $5,000 for some planning and capacity building activities, and we got one for $28 million from Norfolk this time. So which we were able to fund at not fully, but at about $24.5 million. So it really does vary tremendously. We have chosen to prioritize capacity building, planning, and studies because we believe that kind of unlocks all of the other stuff. And in fact, one of the requirements to get a project grant from the flood fund is that you have a local resilience plan and that the project fits with the resilience plan, but we will fund the development of the resilience plan. And so to Southwest Virginia, we've spent the past couple of rounds working with them on resilience plans, and now many of them are getting into the posture where they have the plans and we're able to start funding projects through that. So I mentioned a few slides back that the revolving fund is meant to complement the CFPF and not replace it. I want to expand a little bit on that. We've been working very closely with our partners at the Virginia Resources Authority on sketching out the revolving fund, and the intent here is to have the CFPF and the revolving fund manual or manuals go out for public comment together towards the end of the first quarter of this year with a joint application period. And essentially the intent here is to provide an opportunity for applicants to select the program that's right for them. We think that a joint application probably makes sense because, again, they're 2 different programs, but they kind of play in the same area, and we want people to be able to pick and choose the thing that works for them. We would be shifting to an annual cycle for these programs. That we've done a number of rounds for the CFPF in 1 year, and it's just not sustainable, frankly, from a staff standpoint. Both of the programs have a tremendous amount of flexibility in terms of what they're able to fund, and because of that, we've been able to use the CFPF, because that's the active fund to date, to fill a variety of community needs. But the programs are generally focused in statute towards different needs, and it's our intent going forward to have the programs, once they're both fully stood up, reflect that a little bit more closely. And so at a high level, the CFPF is more targeted towards community scale projects. So you can see here on the slide, so flood protection studies, capacity building, planning, hazard mitigation projects, land acquisition, and land use controls, whereas the revolving fund is more directed towards what I'd call property scale projects, so hazard mitigation of building and real property, home buyouts and relocations, loans and grants for hazard mitigation and infrastructure improvements, and then projects that are identified in one of the various plans.
Senator Hanger.
Just a quick question on that. We had a briefing on this, the fund, I guess this summer. We were in Norfolk for a meeting. But it seems to me the process, and this may be the way it needs to be and should be, is driven by initiative by individuals, groups, local governments, reaching out saying, hey, I could get some money to do this, as opposed to, because we've put about $100 million into it already, and I guess there's some oversight to say, well, what good do we do with $100 million, you know, in total? But it would seem that since it's such a large sum of money, if we were to have a strategy, centralized strategy in the state, in your shop, to say, here's where we really need to do things, let's put some significant money there.
Sure. So that's an excellent point. So one of the goals of Phase 2 of the Coastal Resilience Master Plan and the statewide plan is to get to that point. And frankly, we're not there yet. So we do have a Coastal Resilience Master Plan. It was developed, released last year. I don't know that it's so much a plan as it is a hazard assessment for coastal Virginia, which is a good step in the right direction. But the goal with Phase 2 and the goal with the statewide plan is to get to a point where we can say, okay, here are how the pieces fit together. Here's how these projects work. We can do this project to unlock that. Because right now, you're right, we are relying on localities to elevate these projects to us, and we work very closely with them, and we try to kind of help them along the path, and we do a number of informational meetings and stuff like that. But right now, we are left in the position of evaluating the projects as they come in, sort of compared to the other projects that come in through the grant round, and really using the local resilience plans kind of as the guide for how they fit together. But I do think ultimately we will need to get to a place where there is sort of a high level view of the needs of the Commonwealth, and so that's what we're working towards with Phase 2 of the master plan. That's a lot of the discussion that we're having with the Coastal Resilience TAC about how we structure that. But so that was a long answer to your question, but we're getting there, I think, is the purpose there. So just a couple of other items on this. There are a couple of differences in the terms of the preferences for the Community Flood Preparedness Fund and the revolving fund. The CFPF has a 25% low income requirement and a preference for nature-based programs. There is not a specific low income requirement for the revolving fund, but that is something that is very close to mind for us. As I mentioned, 2/3 of the money that we put out through the CFPF have gone to low income areas, so we are keenly aware of the need of these areas and these individuals, and they are typically some of the most dramatically impacted by these events. The revolving fund has a preference for projects that utilize private industry, serve 2 or more localities, and has a specific carve-out language for the hazard mitigation of buildings, although it doesn't specify how much that carve-out is. One last thing on this, I do want to flag through all of this process that we are going to continue our commitment to transparency and how these programs work. In this past round, we posted all of the applications online. We posted the scoring online. We're going to continue to do that. And we've also committed to putting together an advisory review panel to help evaluate the applications going forward. So, all right. Just a couple more slides, and then I think I'm done with this, and then we can move on to parks. Just to touch really quickly, since both the CFPF and the revolving fund can offer loans and grants, I want to talk a little bit about the loan side of things. Here you can see a sample capitalization of a $10 million loan versus grant proposal. So over the 10-year period, the loan and grant combinations actually exceed funding that you're able to make just putting $10 million out the door in year one. So I think this just demonstrates that you can, with a properly funded revolving fund, you can actually get to higher levels in a grant program. You know, if you probably ask people, they'd rather take the grant than the loan. But depending on how you structure the match requirements, how much of a project you're able to fund from a loan, the loan can actually become more advantageous to the applicant than the grant can over the long run. I want to talk briefly about the difference between funding scenarios and how much difference each dollar makes into a revolving loan program. At the beginning, compounding is important here. So here we have 2 scenarios. One with a revolving program initially funded at $100 million, one that's funded at $200 million. In both cases, we're going to assume that these are 10-year loans that are put out at 2.5% interest, and you constantly put the money back out as it comes in. So for the $100 million scenario, this would put $50 million out in year 1 and 2. For $200 million, it puts $50 million out in years 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that being said, over 10 years, your $100 million turns into about $200 million in total projects. That's the graph on the left there. But the $200 million turns into $380 million. So by providing an additional $100 million up front, you not only get the benefit of that extra $100 million, but you get another $70 million on top of that over the course of 10 years. But really here, I think the key is when you look at annual funding availability. So with the $100 million scenario, by year 10, you've got about $20 million that you can deploy. With the $200 million scenario, you've got $36 million that you can put out. And so as we look at how we fund revolving funds, I think it's important not only to look at what good does this money do now that we put in, but what are we setting ourselves up for 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line, as this funding revolves. And there's any number of ways you can dice this up, but I think the takeaway here is that early money is important for these funds. All right.
There you go. Other questions for Mr. Wells from the
Talk
panel?
about
Matt, thank you.
I'm going to cover parts.
Appreciate it. Very good. How is, in all of these projects, are folks who were awarded grants, are they able to find the companies and the workforce to get the jobs done expeditiously? Are they struggling, along with many businesses, to find the workforce?
I haven't heard anything specific, but I imagine that they are facing the same challenges that everybody else does. And I will also say that, some of this stuff is kind of specialized, and so there may be some workforce development aspects that are worth exploring. And I'm going to cover parks too. So
Very good.
You get more of me. Sorry.
All right. Good deal. Okay. Go right ahead.
All right. Turning to parks, just want to flag this one. That's my 6-year-old at Powhatan State Park on the boat ramp. It's a lot of reason why I do this, because we get to set stuff up for the future, and I think that's really cool. Quick overview on the footprint of our parks. As most of you all are aware, we maintain and operate 41 state parks that provide access to 75,000 acres across the Commonwealth. That includes the responsibility for maintenance for over 1,400 individual structure, cabins to Douthat, picnic shelters at First Landing. A lot of those structures are historic. Some are as old as the 1700s. Many of them were built by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s. We maintain 600 miles of trails, over 1,600 campsites, and we educate thousands of individuals annually. So the map that's on the slide shows the 41 state parks that are active now in green. There are 4 trees that aren't colored in. Those are properties slated for future development. 2 of the properties are currently in DCR ownership. That's Sweet Run in Loudoun County and Mayo River in Henry County. 2 other properties, Hayfields Farm in Highland and Culpeper Battlefields in Culpeper, are currently in the acquisition process under direction from you all in the budget.
Senator Hanger.
Just a quick question. On the naming process.
Yes.
Culpeper Battlefields, I still think it should be Brandy Station. We got to talk to about that.
We would be happy to take direction from the legislature on that. I think these are, I would call them working names.
If it is a battlefield, that would be the name of the battle.
There are actually, so there are a couple of different battlefields there, as you're probably aware. But I would consider these to be working names for now, essentially. This is what you all called them in the budget. All right. We anticipate closing on Hayfield's property before the end of the year and Culpeper Battlefields in the following year. In terms of visitation over the past 3 years, the blue line represents 2019, orange for 2020, and 2021, and yellow for 22. As you would imagine, summer is more popular than other times. And you can see visitation spikes in 20 and 21 with the COVID pandemic. Many of our parks and our other natural areas saw huge spikes in visitation along with other public lands. We welcomed just shy of 7.5 million visitors to our state parks in 2022. As you would anticipate, visitation is tailing off a little bit from pandemic highs. We had about 6.8% fewer visitors than last year, but we are still seeing a boost, and visitation levels remain 7.3% higher than in 2019, which was the last pre-pandemic year. And I will point out, by comparison, the preliminary numbers for NPS, the National Park Service, show that Shenandoah National Park showed that their visitation was down about 10.7%. So we're actually doing a little bit better than some other industry indicators. But very pleased that people seem to have rediscovered the outdoors, decided they liked it, and want to keep coming back. Turning to revenue, in fiscal 22, our 41 state parks generated 57% of their operating budget through a number of non-general fund revenue, services, and programs. They add up to about $31 million. This is a 5% decrease from the previous year, but a 26% increase over fiscal 19, again, the last pre-pandemic year. So when you look at these numbers, you can see the impact that COVID had on our fiscal operation over the past 3 years. So you can see the first three lines there: camping, cabins, and reservation fees. So you had significant downturns in reservation fees and cabins that were the result of temporary closures of those facilities. Not a lot of impact on camping because that's kind of more self-contained. And then a tremendous explosive growth of about 80% as we reopened the cabins back. As we have seen the beginning of a leveling off in visitation numbers, I do want to say our revenues have remained strong with increases to camping and merchandise sales. While the reduction on the line item for parking revenue and admission fees is largely related to lower visitation, the reduction in cabin revenues is primarily affected by the closure of the cabins at Ferrystone State Park and Douthit for major renovations that you all have funded. The cabin refresh is being done in phases, so Ferrystone and Douthit are coming online later this year, but the trend will continue for the next several years with cabins being rotated out for major maintenance and refurbishment at Westmoreland and First Landing in 2024 and 25. The cabin, obviously, we don't like taking revenue-generating facilities offline, but it's necessary to preserve them for the future. And then you can see the other category includes hunting and trapping fees, conference facility, educational fees, concessionaire fees, timber sales, rental operations from leased lands and buildings, fines and penalties, enterprise program fees, and the rental of quarters. So one of our goals moving forward is to find more ways that we can help ourselves to do a better job of self-generating revenue while continuing to ensure that our parks remain very accessible for Virginians of all economic backgrounds.
So your number was that with all of this, 57% of your budget is recovered from revenue?
For the operating budget of parks.
Operating.
Yep, operating budget. Yep. Great. That doesn't include, obviously, capital maintenance, all that. All right. Just hitting economic impact, I think we all know parks can have a tremendous personal impact on folks, but they have a significant economic impact and a resource impact. I think the economic impacts in particular are even more keenly felt because of the location of a number of our parks in otherwise economically distressed areas. So in 2021, which is the last year we have data for right now, visitors to state parks spent an estimated $308.7 million in Virginia. About 40% of this was by out-of-state visitors, so they're coming and they're leaving their money, which we like. The total economic activity stimulated by state parks during 21 was $462 million. And then the total economic impact during 2021 was about $324 million, which is fresh money. So this is money that would not have otherwise been spent in Virginia absent the park system.
Matt, in terms of drawing people to the state parks, many of them, most of them, I guess, are in rural areas. Mm-hmm. And I heard a statistic on television this morning that something like 10% of cars now being sold are EVs, mm-hmm. and charging stations become a big issue. And economic development is beginning to depend on people's ability to have confidence that they can recharge their cars. If they're going to go to a state park, more and more people every year are going to need that. What is the current circumstance, or the current ability of the parks to be in proximity to these facilities so that people can use them and use the parks?
I don't know that I could tell you offhand. We can find out for you. We can try to find proximity to local charging stations. Having charging available at state parks is something that we have discussed. We haven't pursued it very far, but we certainly can follow up with you on that.
Yeah, the world is trending in that direction, and we need to be prepared for it. I saw a chart that just shows, economic development in different regional areas being clustered around where people, can recharge their vehicles. And there's some activity going on. I know have a budget amendment for rural electrification, if you will, for charging stations, because so much of our Southwest economy and rural economy depends on recreation and, promoting the use of trails, parks, bike trails, hunting, fishing, boating, those kinds of things. We want to make sure that we can, service people coming into the state or within the state, being able to have that reliability. And so I think it's something for, the agency to weigh in on, to let us know what your needs might be, especially as this trend, will be continuing.
Sure, we can dig into that for you.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. One of my big focuses is also doing a better job of leveraging our footprint to provide educational experiences for our visitors. The state park system does have a tremendous educational impact. About 250,000 people participated in a ranger-led education program, but I think we can do better, and I think with the right support and the right plan, the state park system has the potential to be the state's largest and most effective environmental education classroom. I think, this is important to me because I think it's one thing to go and see a park and go, yeah, that's pretty. I think it's another thing to go and understand why it's pretty and why it's special. And those are the people that keep coming back. And those are the people that understand the value of preserving the resources. So that's something that's important for us as well. Looking at it from an ROI standpoint, the parks are a good investment of public dollars. For every dollar of tax money that you all invest in the park system, we generate $1.15 in return in state and local tax, which is pretty good ROI, I think. Looking at the resource impact, we continue to protect the things that make Virginia, Virginia. I mentioned we protect over 75,000 acres of wildlife habitat. We're home to rare and endangered species, and we're the keepers of a lot of the history of the Commonwealth, with 2 National Historic Landmarks and 34 National Historic Register sites and a number of battlefields. Turning to the budget. So as a reminder, the budget adopted last year provided $95.5 million in general fund for state park-related capital improvements. That included $45 million for deferred maintenance across the park system. We are tremendously grateful for that, and I'll dig into it in a second. Additionally, you all provided $15.6 million for staffing and operational needs across state parks, which brings the total appropriation for state park management and operations to just shy of $60 million. The governor's proposed budget does contain a few new park-related items, an operating increase of $692,000 in fiscal '24, and 2 positions to support standing up Hayfields Farm State Parks, $20,000 to cover the cost of legislation that would allow members of the Virginia National Guard free day use admission to state parks, along with some language that would stand the program up. An operational increase of just shy of $360,000 to address pay compression for our law enforcement rangers as a part of the administration's Bold Blue Line initiative. There's some technical language that allows us to accept an in-holding property at Hayfields, and then an increase of $3 million in general fund for capital to begin replacing a number of underground storage tanks. We have 25 parks with underground storage tanks. The tanks are old, the tanks are failing. We need to get them out of the ground and replace them with more modern above-ground tanks. So this is kind of phase 1 of that project. It'll allow us to address, we think, about 4 of those parks. One amendment that we have requested is an adjustment to the list of parks and preserves that are allowed to acquire land in items C-1551 of the budget. It's just something that we need to fix, I think. Without the language, we would have to halt a number of pending acquisitions. I do believe that language has been put in for an amendment. Let's see. So talking a little bit about deferred maintenance. All told, the replacement value of the structures in our park system is about $1.2 billion. I mentioned the footprint that we have that includes over 1,400 buildings, some of which are more than 200 years old. 600 miles of trails, 1,600 campsites, 300 cabins, which are tremendously popular. Miles of aging underground utility needs, maintenance needs are growing. State Parks currently is allocated about $3 million on average annually in maintenance reserve. If you look at what kind of an industry standard would be for a system with $1.2 billion in asset replacement value, you'd be looking at closer to $26 to $50 million in annual maintenance funding. So this has led to a pretty significant backlog that's in excess of $350 million. And you can see kind of the general categories here, the largest investments needed in maintaining buildings, trails, utilities, and roads. Just kind of an example here, this is the lodge at Hungry Mother. So the first picture looks nice. That's a very pretty lodge. It's a CCC structure. It is very historic in all sorts of ways. But when you get a little bit closer, you can see the impact that limited maintenance funding has had on this facility over a number of years. This is just what you can see. There's a lot of things that you can't see. They're often more challenging: underground water lines, trail culverts, structural issues, that kind of thing. We are working to address this thanks to the funding that you all provided last year and that the governor signed in the budget. This is a breakdown of the $95 million that I referenced. I'm going to spend the final portion of the presentation outlining how we intend to allocate some of the larger buckets of money. So that would be the one-time funding for deferred maintenance needs, the $10 million revenue generating, and the critical infrastructure needs. So I do want to caveat this in the next few slides by noting that in some cases these reflect current planning. We may have to make adjustments based on actual project costs, other factors. This is kind of where we are right now. I also want to note that we are working to put this money on the ground as quickly as we can in the context of state procurement and construction requirements, along with the staffing capacity that we currently have in our Planning and Recreation Resources Department. Kind of similar to the constraints that we're facing with resilience planning, we're running into a MEL issue on this. We've kind of hit our cap in what we're able to hire, so even where we have fundings, we're not able to bring additional full-time staff on to support that. So just ticking down the list here, we would intend to use the $45 million in deferred maintenance funding for revenue-generating structures at Belle Isle. That's about $4 million. Repairs to marina facilities and docks at Lee, Sylvania, and Claytor Lake. Water distribution system repairs at Hungry Mother, Douthit, James River, Grayson Highlands, Kiptopeke, and Seven Bends is about $5.5 million total. Boardwalk and trail repairs at First Landing is about 1.8. Parking lot repairs at Lake Anna is about 2.3, and we can send you all these numbers later. We have a pretty detailed breakdown of this. HVAC, roof replacement, and paving projects throughout the system. Restroom replacement, restrooms are important, at Lee, Sylvania and Natural Tunnel State Park. Sewer system repairs at Shenandoah River, and historic structure stabilization at Sky Meadows. So able to tick off a number of items off the list with the $45 million. We also got $5 million for critical infrastructure repairs. So we're going to use that for water and sewer repairs at Caledon, Pocahontas, and False Cape State Parks. We're going to address about $1.1 million in ADA compliance needs, and then use about $1.3 million for road and bridge repairs. For the $10 million in revenue-generating facility repairs, we repair and renovate a portion of the cabins at Claytor Lake. That would be about $3.5 million for phase one of a three-phase project. Stabilize and repair critical structures at Hungry Mother. So that's about $1.2 million to chip away at an $18 million need at that park. And then we'd apply about $3.5 million to the $11 million in maintenance needs at our campground. And then finally replacing visitor contact and fee collection stations at 3 parks. So in terms of the base maintenance funding that we would typically get, we got $3.7 million in the adopted budget. We would use these for multiple repairs and replacements across the system, including improving access for boaters at Chesapeake Bay and Kiptopeke, to the Chesapeake Bay at Kiptopeke State Park, repairs to cabins and other buildings at a number of state parks, trail repairs at First Landing, James River, and Highbridge, and water and sewer utility repairs at Shenandoah and Pocahontas. And then finally, we're using pool projects to fund the support of construction of a visitor center at Twin Lake and repairs to the boat ramp at Kiptopeke. So all of these investments combined would reduce that deferred maintenance backlog to $275 million. So again, still got a long way to go, but this is a tremendous improvement over where we started, and we are grateful for it.
How long will it take you to go through those funds and get the jobs completed?
In terms of completing all those projects, probably 3 years.
3 years.
3 years, yeah.
And so we will need to reload the deferred maintenance fund at some point.
Well, you can reload it anytime you want to.
Anytime you want.
Anytime you want to, you'd like to put the money in there, we can put it to good use. And I will say that we do have, we've already identified kind of the next tranche of priority projects that we think we would fund with additional money, and be happy to talk through those with you all at a future date. But certainly, any money that you give us, we're going to put to good use.
With regards to operations and staff and ability to do the interpretive work that the parks like to do, what are your needs, there over the next 5 years?
I'd probably want to come back to you on specifics on that, but just to say that we do have significant staffing and operational needs. Interpretation is one of them. I don't think we have enough interpreters. Housekeeping is a tremendous challenge. I would say that generally speaking, we are over-reliant on wage employees. That makes it difficult to recruit and retain people. And so, we've got a whole slew of seasonal people that come on and go, and that's the seasonal thing, and that you're not going to make those people full time. But we do have some 1,500-hour folks that really should probably be full time people. So I think that's a challenge. We did put in some decision packages for some staff plus ups on the park end, and I can get you some more information on that.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee?
Sorry, I know that was a lot for 7 a.m.
We've memorized it all.
Excellent.
And, we're in good shape. Thank you very, very much, and thank you all for the work you do. In our park system, we appreciate it greatly. And DCR is such an important agency within our Commonwealth. And Matt, thank you for your career dedication to these things. And with that, if there's nothing else, subcommittee will rise. We'll see you at full Finance and Appropriations.